Hello, folks. It's me, Andy Meehan, your next Republican congressman from Pennsylvania's 1st District. Today's fireside chat is about leadership and the state of affairs in Bucks County GOP politics. Pull up a chair and tune out the distractions, as this one covers a lot of ground. But I think it will be worth your time to hear me out. So let's discuss the state of our leadership in Pennsylvania's 1st Congressional District, including Bucks County and parts of Montgomery County. A history lesson is in order here to understand how we got to today's sad state of affairs. Prior to 2016, our district's congressman was Mike Fitzpatrick. Mike was not a perfect Republican, but he was a hard worker, amiable and trustworthy, someone with a good heart and a sense for listening to his people and voting in a way that they could live with, while perhaps not agreeing with him on every vote and position. Our current Congressman, Brian Fitzpatrick, Mike's younger brother, is a different story altogether. Unlike his brother Mike, who had risen through the ranks, paid his political dues, and earned his seat in Congress on his own merit, brother Brian Fitzpatrick was handed his seat by Pat Poprick, the chair of the county GOP committee, when Mike opted not to run for re-election. Even though brother Brian had lived out of the district for over 2 decades in California and New York, working as a political corruption specialist with the FBI, and was completely unknown to the voters of our district. Brian was fresh off his stint in Ukraine, where he was sent to help fix corruption in late 2015. He was stationed in Kiev while Joe Biden was busy lining the pockets of his wayward and blatantly unqualified son, Hunter Biden, as a board member with Burisma, the corrupt energy giant under investigation by the prosecutor Victor Shokin. But because Brian's last name was Fitzpatrick, and because Mike Fitzpatrick had served admirably in good esteem by voters in the district as our congressman, the voters of what was then called PA District 8 elected brother Brian, with many voters at the time not even realizing that Brian Fitzpatrick was not Mike Fitzpatrick. Not even close. It didn't take long for brother Brian to jump the guardrails and tarnish his family legacy. The first sign of his divergence from family tradition was in October 2016, when Brian Fitzpatrick publicly announced his opposition to the GOP presidential nominee, the man at the top of the ticket, Donald J. Trump. Brian famously condemned candidate Trump during the week of October 2016 after the Billy Bush tapes surfaced, and he defied the party norms and his GOP base by writing in Mike Pence for president on that fateful day, November 8th, 2016, effectively casting his vote for crooked Hillary Clinton. Brian skated into office on the coattails of Trump, using his brother's good name as collateral. Had Trump not been there to mastermind the massive upset and bring victory to the GOP, rescuing our country from certain disaster, Brian Fitzpatrick would have faded into anonymity and been forgotten as a political figure. But brother Brian was in the right place at the right time and with the right last name. The rising tide of Donald Trump and the deplorables swept brother Brian Fitzpatrick into office. Brother Brian quickly set to work positioning himself as the most reliable defector and self-described check on the Trump presidency in the entire U.S. House of Representatives, highly palatable to the left and propped up by the Fitzpatrick-Poprick establishment political machine who would deliver the GOP votes, ensuring his election. To them, Brian Fitzpatrick, perhaps anyone named Fitzpatrick, seemed a reliable successor to his brother Mike. In his first term as the congressman, brother Brian thumbed his nose at his Trump-supporting base and President Trump, casting a no vote for Obamacare repeal, though he had promised to vote for Obamacare repeal during the run-up to the 2016 election. He fought President Trump tooth and nail on the travel ban, funding for the border wall, and coming to the defense of disgraced former FBI Director James Comey, his mentor and former boss, warning President Trump to stop attacking the FBI. He he came out in full-throated support of the corrupt and politically motivated Mueller investigation, which Brother Brian still supports in TV, radio, and other interviews to this very day. His only legislative claims to his GOP moniker were his yes votes on legislative layups, the tax bill, and the Right to Try Act. Drawing the ire of his party's rank and file voters, Brian earned a primary challenge from conservative attorney Dean Malik in May 2018. In my own first foray into politics, I worked on Dean's campaign as a supporter, door knocker, and poll worker. Dean was a Marine veteran and advanced a thoughtful and conservative platform to unseat Brian Fitzpatrick in the May 2018 primary. But Dean faced many headwinds. It was an off year in 2018, with President Trump not on the ballot. Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick's cynical votes and opposition to the president had not been exposed to the vast majority of GOP primary voters, and such voters were urged over and over again to trust the guy with an R next to a Fitzpatrick name. While the Bucks County Fitzpatrick-Poprick establishment political machine made sure that Dean Malik was cut off at the knees, Dean still managed a respectable but insufficient 34% of the vote in a disappointing primary loss. Conservatives bristled at the underhanded effort by the party elites to torpedo Dean Malik. After his victory in the May 2018 primary, Congressman Fitzpatrick began his hard left turn, positioning himself barely to the right of his Democrat challenger for the general election in November 2018. In the debate of October 25, 2018, at the Bucks County Community College, Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick implored his Democrat opponent to not place the label Republican upon him, as they were there to debate the issues. Brian brandished his no-labels credentials like the true rhino that we have come to know, making news in regional and national media outlets for being the Republican who doesn't want to be called a Republican. Brian limped across the finish line in the 2018 general election victorious, with a scant 2% margin of victory over an absolutely terrible Democratic opponent, Scott Wallace. Wallace was a cynical candidate of the left, a trust fund baby multimillionaire pimping far-left progressive socialist ideology unpalatable even to moderate Democrats down county. Wallace was buoyed only by the gobs of his own money spent in a cynical attempt to buy the seat. Bucks County Republicans like myself were instructed by the establishment to hold our noses and vote for the rhino Fitzpatrick to stop the socialist from winning. The Bucks County GOP electorate was turned into a circular firing squad, with conservatives being forced to choose between the left-loving Brian Fitzpatrick and the socialist opponent, or writing in a candidate like Mike Pence, like Fitzpatrick himself had done to Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election. With a narrow victory in hand, Brother Brian Fitzpatrick continued his long march to the left. His positions and statements prompted prominent and well-respected historian of Bucks County, Courier Times journalist J.D. Mullane, to declare that Fitzpatrick is to the left of Levittown Kennedy Democrats, with his vote in support of the Equality Act, which would force transgender people into locker rooms, changing rooms, schools, sports teams, and living rooms.
So why does a guy like Brian Fitzpatrick then, I'll give you a real good case in point to me, this Equality Act thing, in which girls who are great athletes are forced to run, at least in Connecticut and a couple of other places it's happened, state championships against two guys who are just gender identifying. They've done nothing to transition to being a female, and they're told to lump it, and this act protects that. Is really in Bucks County, is that what even the moms want?
No. I don't. Look, Brian is a Democrat. His brother Mike was a Democrat, but you got to be a Republican in Bucks County if you want to go to Congress. So that's how they registered. They come out of that Levittown Kennedy Democrat, milieu here in Lower Bucks County. It's just in the air still. But no, he has to win the River Wards. He has to win New Hope. He has to win the Haight Has No Home people in Doylestown Borough. That's just the kind of district it is. I understand it, but it really is annoying, especially because that particular law, I believe, I've read opinion pieces on it, that it would remove conscience clauses from people in hospitals for abortions and things like that. So St. Mary Hospital would be a big target.
Fitzpatrick was actually a Democrat, but he knew that only a Republican would win the seat, so he registered as such. This terrible bill, if passed into law, would have spelled the doom of women's sports. Transgenders, biological men who identified as female, would be mandated to be allowed to compete with girls and women and share their locker rooms with no recourse for any women, our daughters and granddaughters, to object in the court of law. Doctors would be forced to perform gender transition surgeries against their religious convictions, against parental consent, or even common sense. It was a shocking position for a Bucks County Republican to take. Conservative talk show host Dom Giordano shook his head, perplexed by the absurdity of Brian Fitzpatrick's support for the radical leftist transgender agenda. Among hundreds of examples of Congressman Fitzpatrick's talking like, acting like, and voting like a Democrat while masquerading as a Republican are his flip-flop to vote against concealed carry reciprocity for Second Amendment rights. Perhaps the most egregious of all was Brian Fitzpatrick's vote with Nancy Pelosi, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to label President Trump a racist in July 2019. That brings us to the current sad state of affairs for Republicans in Pennsylvania District 1. On November 5th, 2019, the Bucks County GOP was handed its worst defeat in 30 years, losing all of the row offices in the courthouse and leaving us with Ben Salem's longtime state rep, Gene DiGirolamo, as the lone minority Republican on the county commission. 2/3 of the judges' seats and the clerk of courts, register of wills, and county coroner, all consummate professionals, were sent packing. It was a bloodbath for the Republicans. Republicans in our district lost bigly. This is where our chat returns to leadership. After the stinging defeat of November 5th, the party establishment brushed off the defeat, stating that we gave it our best shot. The Democrats won. They haven't won in a while. In a display of self-serving absolution of the defeat, the leadership of the party brass sent out the message that the defeat was due to changing demographics. The Bucks County Republicans failed to show up on Election Day, and we lost bigly. Absent from any discussion of this tragic historic loss was the central part played by Bucks County's own Colin Kaepernick, Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. As the highest level elected Republican public official in the district, Brother Brian has taken zero accountability or responsibility for our defeat. Judging by Congressman Fitzpatrick's many social media posts, public appearances, and media interviews before, during, and after the November 5th Republican massacre, one might safely assume Congressman Fitzpatrick either doesn't know about our historic defeat or doesn't care. Maybe both. Maybe, just maybe, if Congressman Fitzpatrick had given credit to Republican values for the success of the Trump economy, if Congressman Fitzpatrick had been a bold and vocal supporter of Republican values such as limited government, lower taxes, less regulation, and standing tall for the rule of law against the corruption of the bureaucrats and Democrats in Washington and beyond, if Congressman Fitzpatrick had taken the case for conservatism to the voters of Bucks County in defense of our values, if Congressman Fitzpatrick had drawn attention to the improved incomes and standard of living for working folks in our district because of the Trump economy, if Congressman Fitzpatrick had asked for help from our president to come to our district and lobby for our candidates instead of distancing himself from the Trump administration, maybe we would have convinced the voters to stay the course with a fiscally sound county government and motivated them to act for the common purposes of retaining control of our local government. Maybe those forgotten and disenfranchised Trump supporters who stayed home would have felt that they needed to act and would be motivated to come out on November 5th. Maybe if we had a leader, we would have won the battle. We know how the sad story of November 5th, 2019 ended, but what we don't know is, what if? What we do know now, as evidenced by Congressman Fitzpatrick's interview on NBC News on November 22nd, 2019, is that our so-called Republican Congressman, Brian Fitzpatrick, thinks that the same FBI that used a phony Steele dossier to spy on President Trump should now be activated once more to investigate the Ukraine situation, aiming to bring down President Trump in a cynical and corrupt impeachment process.
Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick says this is not a serious investigation, and he believes that there should be one. And he believes that there should be one. There should be one. There should be one. He told me he wants more investigation. He told me he wants more investigation, more investigation, more investigation before voting on impeachment. So do you want to hear from people like John Bolton, Mick Mulvaney?
Absolutely. We can't get a full 360-degree rounding out of the facts unless we hear from everybody.
The administration is preventing them from testifying. The administration should allow them to.
I think everybody should testify. I think everybody should testify. Everybody should testify.
The congressman wants to be able to call witnesses himself. The congressman wants to be able to call witnesses himself. Call witnesses himself. Call witnesses himself, including FBI Director Chris Wray, and suggests that agency or a special counsel like Bob Mueller, should handle the investigation. Fitzpatrick calls what he heard in the last 2 weeks more troubling allegations.
Congressman Fitzpatrick says he wants to get to the bottom of the baseless quid pro quo allegations of President Trump, but turns a blind eye to the blatant corruption under Obama-Biden to withhold $1 billion in aid to Ukraine unless they fired the guy investigating Hunter Biden and Burisma. Why is it that Congressman Fitzpatrick is always on the scene calling for the apolitical and unbiased FBI to investigate President Trump, but he turns a blind eye to the failure of the FBI to hold crooked Hillary Clinton accountable for her illegal and egregious email scandal? Why does Congressman Fitzpatrick not want to get to the bottom of the corrupt Mueller investigation, which completely ignored the Steele dossier and the origins of the Peter Strzok, Lisa Page crossfire hurricane coup attempt? What I am left wondering is Congressman Fitzpatrick a modern-day Inspector Clouseau, a bumbling fool, oblivious to the political corruption going on all around him, or is he like disgraced Trump-hating FBI agent Peter Strzok, actively involved in abusing government law enforcement power to attack his political opponent? Whether Congressman Fitzpatrick is more like Inspector Clouseau or FBI agent Strzok is yet to be determined. However, what is clearly established is that we have the highest elected public official in our district acting, talking, and voting like a Pelosi Democrat. Of this, there is no question. All you have to do is go to the Fitz Watch section of my website, Meehan2020.com, to see the hundreds of publicly sourced, verifiable media reports that we have compiled. My friends, to see it is to look upon a wall of shame as a Republican. Congressman Fitzpatrick has voted again and again with Democrats for gun bans, red flag gun confiscation, Planned Parenthood, amnesty, Obamacare, carbon taxes, transgender rights, and publicly condemning President Trump as a racist. When the highest elected public official in our district acts and votes like a Democrat, he sends a clear message to the Pennsylvania District 1 voters: be like me and vote Democrat. Is it any wonder we got our butts handed to us on November 5th? Is this pattern not plain to see by anyone who who has eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, what we see crystal clear from the results of the November 5th, 2019 election is that the Bucks County GOP voters have a leader that is, at best, a listless and spineless advocate for conservative governance. We are scattered and leaderless, a ragtag army with no general and no plan except to re-elect him to preclude the boogeyman socialists from taking over. What has Congressman Fitzpatrick done to help our cause but to sprinkle around his corrupt crony cash harvested from special interests outside of our district in exchange for fealty in his self-serving re-election campaign? We have our own Bucks County version of Neville Chamberlain, who is in bed with the Trump resistance. We have a progenitor of a failed policy of appeasement of the radical left, content to profit via his own re-election over the managed decline of the Bucks County GOP, our country, and our way of life. I entered this race on Independence Day, July 4th, 2019, to provide the voters of Pennsylvania's 1st District a voice, which has been dead silent since Dave Christian ran for office decades ago. I have in my hands here a fork. I am sticking this fork into Congressman Fitzpatrick because he is done. We are done. If Pat Poprick and Kevin McCarthy think that we are going to hold our noses one more time and vote for this spineless, self-serving disgrace, a fake Republican, a wolf in sheep's clothing, they are sorely mistaken. Brian Fitzpatrick is finished. My name is Andy Meehan, your next Republican congressman from Pennsylvania District 1. I am here to fork Brian Fitzpatrick. I am here to stick a fork in Congressman. Please don't call me a Republican, Brian Fitzpatrick. Stick a fork in him. He is done. Ladies and gentlemen, I have in my hands a list, the Fitz Watch list. Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick's votes and statements against Donald Trump, his Republican colleagues, and our Republican values, which is published at meehan2020.com. Ladies and gentlemen, in my hands I have a big, shiny fork. As a man of the people, a rank-and-file Pennsylvania 1st District Republican, as one who simply wants our Republican congressman to talk and act like a Republican who supports President Trump and his agenda, I am giving a voice to the forgotten and abandoned voters who are crying out in frustration. Frustration at the calls for endless investigations into Trump while casting a blind eye to the corruption of the FBI and the Obama administration. Frustration at calling for $0 for the wall, but $25 billion for upgrades to detention centers for illegals. Frustration with his policy of chipping away at our Second Amendment rights. Frustration with constant condemnation of President Trump getting us out of the disastrous Paris climate change accords while calling for insane new carbon taxes on every American family and business. Frustration with Congressman Fitzpatrick playing cynical political identity politics games, calling President Trump a racist with his pals Nancy Pelosi, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Frustration at Congressman Fitzpatrick being the only Republican that Congressman Fitzpatrick helps to win in District 1. Frustration at giving up, giving in, throwing in the purple towel, acquiescence, and collaboration with defeat. We are done with this record of failure and betrayal. We are sticking a fork in Congressman Fitzpatrick because he's done. We want leadership who is going to listen to us and fight back against the attack on our way of life and our president. Myself, Andy Meehan, is that fighter, and I will not let you down. We are here to make a final stand where we will fortify on the high ground, defend the shining city on a hill of Republican values and principles, and be victorious, or we will die trying. We are not going down without a fight. We either march to victory now, today, or hold our noses forever to be chained to the rotting carcass that is the Brian Fitzpatrick legacy. I'm Andy Meehan, your next Republican congressman from Pennsylvania District 1, and I approve this message.